the video working. Okay, that's now on. You were here last time.
Yeah.
Tell us your name again.
My name is Lucy.
Yeah, I think you didn't say much about yourself. Why don't you say a little more today?
Okay, so I'm a first year graduate student in math program. I'm a track in civic sociology. And that's all.
But you had one big point, which you could maybe state it briefly, and I asked if you could elaborate maybe today or whenever you can about beautiful China. You don't read about this in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post or whatever. Why and how is beautiful China a major issue, which you briefly mentioned last week?
Okay, I must say that the first reason is because it's one of our
the first what?
reason.
First reason. So
Yeah, is that
just slowly and clearly.
okay? I will retry.
Sure.
The first reason is that it is one of the selected title of the essay of one of our biggest exams.
Selected title of what's the word?
Essay.
Asset?
Or article.
Article.
Yeah,
Okay.
article, and like so I remember this so much, and okay, so
tell us a little more. When you say selected article, you mean in a classroom, in a newspaper?
no, it's for our a really important exam.
Exam.
Yeah.
Okay. Exam at what level?
For the
High school, college, university?
the high school.
High school.
Yeah, the high school one. And I thought it is really important because at that time or before that policy, I know some places in my hometown, the Henan province is a big province.
Just tell us briefly what part of China. Tell us a little bit about
I think it's in the middle of China. Just my hometown, like they, the government, they're.
Your hometown is how big? How many population roughly? Just to give a sense. 5 million, 10,000.
I don't know. I will just search. I have no idea. I know it's maybe the biggest, the province with biggest population in China. Let me check.
But did you live in a city of more than 1 million people, or?
Yeah.
Okay, more than 1 million people. Because you see, just this hometown. My point is, for Americans, that's huge.
I got you.
A small town is 5,000, 3,000. Most Chinese live in what the world would consider big cities, and they create new cities of 2 million, every couple of years. Okay, so tell us more.
Okay, so
in that sense, in world terms, you're urban. Okay.
Okay, that makes sense. And before that policy, when I saw the advertisement on the TV shows, they will emphasize some cultural, some man-making architectures to attract people to come there. And after they, the Beauty China policy were polished, I could saw the government focus more on their nature environment, not only in the advertisements, but also they pay more money on this thing, and sometimes I saw in some way I can't understand it because just protect environment is always a thing with conflict with the financial development or economic development. But because of that policy, the governments change their, I think the finance, you know,
They're what?
their, I think it's the financial plan or something, and to pay more money on the protect nature.
To protect, okay, protect nature, that's the big point.
Yeah.
So beautiful China means protecting nature and more. But that's the sort of background, the sense of it's an explicit labeling of aesthetics, feeling, views, which is both aesthetics, attractive, and healthy. But tell us, go ahead. I mean, what you're saying is perfect. Just tell us a little bit more.
Okay.
And so every high school kid is getting this. And the other point is, this is very new. That is, China and the U.S. were both very slow behind the Europeans. The Europeans were the leaders in saying, we got dirty air, we got dirty streets, we got garbage, we've got to make this place cleaner. And we should focus on, so the Germans first had a green party. That was a revolution 20, 30 years ago. Okay, so have a green political party, and then to have other political parties. Oh my God, there are a lot of voters there. We better pay attention. So the parties of the normal left, the normal right, and so forth. So let's have a green section. Let's start to adopt some of these things. So the Chinese then did what? What else?
I remember at that time, Beijing, like the capital of China, has a really serious pollution, the air pollution, and just after that, okay, just around the year that, I searched on the internet, it's not named the Beauty China, it's Amazing China, just correctly. And after the Amazing China policy, so many factors in Beijing that could produce some air pollutions are forced to move to another city to protect the quality of air in the capital. And I thought at that time the government also paid more attention to the nature resources in that city, to pay more money to develop them, to protect them, and to attract more visitors to, enjoy the nature springs and, hills, rivers, and such thing. And it become popular in a way. And I think that's the reason why I mentioned this policy at that time.
That's great. You said, I think, last time that there were certain previous concerns of the government would be more presented separately, such as for transportation or parks or these kinds of things separately. The city, the government, national government would both do all of those, but they put them together, and that's the interesting point. You put it in your very brief sentence. These previous separate issues were put together with the general label of beautiful China in the world. And that in the world part means we are polluting the entire world, and because we're such a big country, and a little bit of change here could affect not only China, but all the world. And this was happening simultaneous when the President of the United States was most visibly Donald Trump. And Trump, previous governments before Trump had at least sort of said, yeah, we support the environment, but we're not going to do anything serious. Whereas Trump took, he became very anti-environmental. And so China did the opposite. China in those years became the world leader of the environment in a serious way, that the U.S. had done the opposite by Trump. So in that sense, that was a world-leading policy in that respect. Okay, so that was not only good aesthetics and citizen responsiveness and so forth, but it was visible big politics. And so this was not, and so it was part of making the cities, or let me add the second picture or background. Earlier, say before you were born, say roughly, after World War II until say when you're in high school, what was the simple big policy of the Japanese, the Koreans, and the Chinese to catch up? That is, after World War II, the Koreans and many of the Chinese were they were about the same as Africa in terms of the income. That is, people were poor. China and Korea were thought of as very poor countries. Most of Latin America, most of Africa, much of Asia were considered very poor countries. What happened? China, Japan, and Korea had an explicit policy that we will produce things that are cheaper than they can make in America or Europe, and we will export. We will produce those products, cars, televisions, toasters, refrigerators. We'll make them better and cheaper than they can make them in Europe, in part because we have lower salaries, but also because we're going to work very hard to catch up and do better. And basically, they did brilliantly well. All three of them did this. And then, after 20, 30, 40 years, then we get to the children and the grandchildren like you. People are saying, okay, yeah, of course we're comfortable now. Because your parents and your grandparents worked very hard. And so the Chinese national government said, okay, let's shift away from just producing and exporting. Let's also build up let's build up China, inside China. And let's shift our policies in a consumption direction to include not just production, of continue producing, of course, but we'll also consume things. Where does most of which we talked about last time, only two of you were here last time. What's the most important, but where does most food in China come from? Is it grown in China? No. Where does China get most of its food from? U.S. The U.S. exports most of the food that the Chinese eat. How does American fund its huge deficit? We're spending more than the U.S. is collecting in taxes. We're not collecting taxes, we are spending more. That means a deficit. Where does the money cover that deficit from? You borrow, you issue treasury bills, and who buys those treasury bills in majority? Chinese. Chinese banks buy thousands, billions of dollars of these. So some people have said we live in one economy. China and the U.S. are not really separate. We have differentiated roles in types of things which are stronger and weaker. So last time we showed potatoes and how in growing potatoes are healthy, efficient, they don't need that much water, they're cheaper to make and so forth, and you can grow them in what was a former desert, whereas rice takes a lot of land. But everybody in China generally has said we want to have rice. So the Chinese government is saying, okay, let's also grow some potatoes. Let's grow a lot of potatoes. And now China is the biggest grower in the world of growing potatoes. But it still is importing, all kinds of other food, wheat and other things from and fish. One Chinese student said, what do you miss most about China now that you've been here? I said, the fish. The fish in America are terrible. And so I read about this a little bit. The best fish in America are exported to the Japanese and the Chinese and the Koreans. You go to McDonald's and you get lousy fish. Okay. It's cheap. It's right. But so in that sense, there are a few high-end restaurants in the U.S. that have got some of those top fish, but they're exporting. So in this sense, we've got differentiated foci. Okay. So one thing along with that was when this book came out in English, the Chinese translated it, and it had a huge impact. Because the timing, it wasn't just the book, it was the timing. The Chinese were shifting toward consumption, and they said, how do we actually do this? And whereas in the U.S. these are left more to developers, to entrepreneurs, to individual neighborhood people, and so forth. Maybe one city, but in China they said we want a national plan. We don't want to do just, and this was covered in the Wall Street Journal, for instance, all the time. Would be, what's the growth plan of and you still see this in the American press. The Chinese economy is really turning down, because last year it was growing 9%, and it's now down to 7%. It's really down, whereas in the U.S., maybe 2%, something like that. So the U.S. press has not played up, but the Chinese really shifted their policy, and they then said, we're not going to have a policy we will list as financial at all. We're not going to say it will be 9% or 7%. We're not going to say anything. And what did they say instead? We're going to have scenes for cities across China. We're going to make China beautiful. And they said this in 6 different ways: for the economy, for leisure time, for trade, and so forth. So in December, when we had a session on this, we had 1.4 million who were local government officials, they're academics, they're consultants, they're developers, and so forth. So people are really they're building a beautiful China, as you heard when you were in high school. But my point is, this is very new and very different So where and how the rest of the world adopted green policies is also, it's a very controversial issue. That is, the Europeans for 4 or 5 years, and the Greens, just in one sentence, when the German and Italian Greens became important as groups, they went to the Communist Party, the Socialist Party, and they said, we're Greens, we want to add this issue to your program and your party. Wouldn't you support the green issues? And the Socialists and the Communists in Germany, they said, we represent the proletariat, get out of here. And so what did the Greens do in Germany? They became terrorists. They blew up trains. They assassinated people. They took kidnaps. They kidnapped top politicians and wives and children of their politicians for about 5 years. And then people were saying, hey, there's a lot of green interest after all. We were wrong. Things are changing. And so the socialists and communists embraced the Greens, and they also had a new Green Party in Germany. And green issues have taken off in ways that, just one example. I was driving from Switzerland into Germany. In Switzerland, they had salt, or something like salt on the road. You didn't slide off. As soon as you crossed the border into Germany, they had no salt and they had ice all over the roads. You got to slow down to about 5 miles an hour. It's a freeway. People would be going 60, 70 miles an hour. You slow down to 5 miles an hour, and you're still almost sliding. Green policies were enacted with huge, dramatic change in Germany in that example in a short period of time. And I didn't know about it until I was jamming the brakes as soon as I saw cars sliding around like that. Okay, so that's so the U.S. has started to be cleaner, but the American version of that was implemented, I'll say ironically, in terms of national politics. Who was the president who was most important for creating, per se? We had students who were studying the environment and these were local policies initially. When I first came to Chicago, before I'd start to drive down to the university, I'd sit down in the car. The windshield was covered with dust and dirt and muck all over it every single day. So I'd turn on the windshield and the wipers to try to get the screen clean enough to be able to drive for 5 miles from Bronzeville down to High Park. I've always lived in Bronzeville for whole time I've been here. My whole adult life, basically. Who changed that? Yeah, so we had students who then they did PhDs on the pollution was coming from Gary, South Chicago, Hammond. They had the biggest steel producers in the United States were right there, and in Pittsburgh. Those two cities, and so they created the steel. They sent to Detroit. They sent to other cities for creating cars, for making all these big things. Who changed that? And it was and this city was really dirty. Who was the president? Richard Nixon. Under Nixon, nobody ever talks about this. They talk about corruption, etc. But under him, the Congress, with him in agreement, created the Environmental Protection Agency, and they started to impose. So compared to China or the Europeans, it was slow. It was much more slow, but it has made a big difference. So I went to London and Paris 7 years ago. I mean, I thought things would be cleaner, would be better. I couldn't stand it. So I couldn't fly because I had allergies. I was so allergic to smoke and to stuff. I said, how is it so dirty? So I looked up the dirt. The cleanest city of the big cities is Stockholm. Once you get below that, you get to places like Chicago, New York, LA, and they're pretty clean. I had no idea they would be so clean internationally. You drop it sort of maybe 5 and then 7 for Chicago, New York. You drop down to 10 or 15 for London and Paris. You go down to Mumbai or Beijing, and it's like 35. They're the dirtiest cities, and so people would come back from Beijing who would talk about what's it like in Beijing. Well, it's a beautiful city, but if you're in an elevator, you could look up at the top of the elevator, and the smoke is green inside an elevator. Okay, so this is the crude, simple indicators that you can see the difference. So the Chinese have really said, we're going to change that in a revolutionary way, and they've been doing that. And at least they haven't implemented it everywhere, but it's a dramatic transformation. That is, Nixon, you didn't have Richard Nixon hats which said, make America beautiful. The way the Chinese basically kids were learning this in high school. Okay. So we have red hats that say other things. Okay, so so in a sense we've got a related big point we then talked about, and you made. Sorry, let's introduce you as your today.
My name is Tessa Kim, but you can call me Francis.
Say a little louder. What you call this? What?
Tessok.
Tessok. T-E-S-O-K.
Yes.
Okay.
And I'm from South Korea.
Okay.
And I'm a graduate student of CIR, and originally
International relations.
yes.
Okay.
International relations
Okay.
graduate program, and I originally had interested in international organizations like the UN, but I always loved traveling cities around the world. So I also had interest in this field, like the aesthetic perspective of world cities, global cities. So so I enrolled this class.
How did aesthetic and environmental, and let's add transportation and the beauty of the river of the city of Seoul, that was equally dramatic, in some ways more dramatic, that is, it was more dramatically and forcefully and rapidly implemented in Korea than I've told you so far in the US or Europe or China. Okay, tell everybody about what the dramatic change was in Seoul, which led to the mayor being elected president of Korea. What did he do as mayor to make him become elected president?
From mayor to president.
Yes.
There were some several mayors who have been president of a country later.
President of what?
President of a country.
Yes.
From mayors to.
There was one big environmental policy that transformed the environmental concern and symbolized it so much, and it was politically covered, especially when you mentioned you've looked at cities in the rest of the world outside Korea. What was the Korean analog like the Germans and the Italians took kidnappers, were kidnappers, they kidnapped people. The Americans have the Environmental Protection Agency as an agency sort of implementing this. So what happened in Korea?
I'm not sure what
It's a simple answer you'll know as soon as I do. There was one river, the Seoul River went right through the center of the city. And it had a freeway with big, wide, what was it, 4 lanes, 5 lanes, 6 lanes, right through the middle of the city on both sides, and mostly covering over the river, right through the middle of the city. It was a huge freeway. And what the mayor did said, this is pollution. It's generating it dirty for air pollution. All these cars and trucks are going through here in the middle of the city. And it's ugly and it's dangerous if you try to cross that with all those freeways, etc.
Yes.
So he tore it down.
Yeah.
He tore down the whole freeway in the middle of the city, and it worked. And they replaced it with pedestrian malls, flowers, trees, greenery, and it was so dramatically successful that he was elected mayor from mayor to president of Korea. President, yes. Okay. So in that sense, in each of these countries, this has become a dramatic new set of issues. And I never worked on these issues myself. I didn't teach any courses that involved what we're talking about in this course. I published a book called City Money. It was the New York fiscal crisis. I worked on finance. I taught the first courses here on urban public finance. The students came here. The students came to me. There were people who were smart students here. They were hired to work for Goldman Sachs, etc., the top investment banks and others in New York. They were hired to go. They were graduates of the law school and the business school and public policy. And they said, we don't have a single course here on municipal finance, but I know you're working on this. Why don't you teach? Could you teach a course? So I did. So my point was, I wasn't working on these aesthetic issues at all myself. We then found Robert Putnam published a book called Bowling Alone. Anybody knows what it says? It's a bestseller book, huge impact. The title, Bowling Alone. Sounds trivial maybe, but why is it, what was his big argument? Okay, so not familiar to folks. Quick argument was, Americans used to do much more of joining the Boy Scouts, going to church, going to the Lions Club, going to the community center kinds of organizations, neighborhood organizations, and so forth. And this has been going down in the last 20 years. It's dropped substantially. And so Putnam went back to his hometown where he had been in Ohio. Professor at Harvard, went back and said, he went to the bowling alleys where he used to be a high school kid, and he had a shirt, and he was a member of a league, and they would play bowling in teams, fighting, competing against each other. He went back and he went to the bowling alley owner, and he said, what's new? The teams aren't here anymore. He said, what's happening? I still see people here. Answer is, they're bowling alone. Okay, that's the metaphor. Why is this critically important for the world and for the title? What makes America different from the world? In the most famous book about American society and especially its democracy, Who's the author of that book, and what's the title, and what's its 2-word summary? 3 words. Who's the author of the title? You all should know this. It's part of your general education, especially if you're in professional schools. Or let me lead into this. Several of you are from economics and background on finance. When Amartya Sen, the Indian, was given his Nobel Prize in Sweden, he spoke and said, the most important change in the 20th century in the world was, what did he say? What would, if you were a Chinese, American, German, Italian, what most of the economists would have said? Something about competition, economic growth, people are getting richer, the world is getting more equal in income, something like that. He didn't say any of those. What did he say? Democracy, 1 word. And what did the most famous book, when you take a course here on American culture, politics, so forth, the book is called Democracy in America, and the title and the author is named Alexis de Tocqueville. So Tocqueville came here about 1810, 1820, and he wrote the book, which is still taught in our own courses. It's like we don't teach it to high schools the beautiful America. We teach democracy in America. And what you see in the front page stilt in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and so forth. We have democracy, and China does not, Russia does not, Ukraine does not. They don't say we want to have an American empire. They say they want to choose their democracy. Those are the words that American leaders and many citizens think in terms of. And since 2 big dates that I'll talk about, 1968, 1989. 68 was the counterculture, Berkeley, Columbia. It was a cultural explosion in the U.S. It was not a Marxist revolution. It was a cultural revolution. And it was lifestyle. People could have green hair in Beijing, green hair in Berkeley. And so forth. So we normally try to have 2 of these, but as we don't, we'll shift it back and forth between me and the rest of you. See how this looks if we. Okay. Just to finish that quick point. Putnam's book was right as far as it went. I had a collaborator from the Netherlands. He just finished a PhD and he spent a summer in Chicago. We said, this book is everybody is reading it, but I started teaching it in the first year college. First year college American U.S. Chicago students. And they said there's something wrong with this book. And we talked about that. And I won't go into that, but then I had reservations about it. So Peter Achterberg came from the Netherlands. We spent 4 months. We worked over lots of data. We got the data that Putnam had used, and we found he was right for many things, for the Lions Club, for many things that he shows like that. But one thing he doesn't show in the arts was how about in his book is the arts and culture and things like beautiful China. He doesn't explicitly compare the kinds of those activities to the others. And if you do that with some items, which we found, such as in the World Values Survey, the WVS, and the same kind of item is used in many other questionnaires. What kinds of organizations are you a member of? Are you a member of the highest ones in the U.S. are unions and churches, more often in Western Europe as well. In Korea, what would be number 1? Unions and churches?
Unions in churches. What was it?
Bicycle clubs? Hunting clubs? Dance clubs? Nightclubs? Bars?
Maybe churches or convenience store.
Church, I mean, Korea is much higher than any of these other countries. Way above the rest of the world, way above the Americans and the Europeans. The churches are very, very actively going to church. And they have 4 religions, and they all compete with each other. They have Buddhist, Confucian, Catholic, and Protestant. And the Protestants, they use that general term, but they really mean evangelical Calvinist Protestants, like the Baptists, Jehovah's Witnesses, the Mormons, and they go around, the Koreans go all around the world to Africa, to Latin America, to other parts of Asia, and the larger percentage of the Korean population is doing evangelical work than any other country in the world. Americans, the Mormons are tiny, but the Koreans are very active in this. Okay. And I don't want to go over too many things, but I'm trying to. The point I'm making with the names of countries. The general point I'm making, illustrating these, is that the contexts may change about where and why and how green parties. We don't have a green party in the U.S. We have a 2-party system. The Europeans have a multi-party system, so they have a green party because of that. I won't go into details, but because of it's the way the party system works. In Korea we have, in China they don't have national elections. They don't have national elections. They have elections for China in small towns, but they don't have national elections the way we do in Western Europe. So the Europeans and the Americans say, you don't have democracy because you don't have national elections. So the Chinese answer ever since 1945 is basically, you have so much poverty it doesn't make any difference. What we are doing in China is overcoming poverty. We're giving people more income, enough ability to think and to learn how to read, and basically, and they did it over 30, 40 years. Okay, so with that transformation away from solving, getting beyond subsistence, bare subsistence level to a comfortable level. I mean, you see pictures now of all the Chinese cities. Looks very affluent. Many parts of the U.S. are much poorer. Many neighborhoods in U.S. cities are poorer than most of what you see in Chinese cities. It's very, very different. Okay, and it's fast. That's a big change. Okay, so the next step we heard, if you can tell us about the 4 things. So we talked about one thing. We talked about where and why and how may we have some of this new focus on beauty. Where does this come from? Why does it work, and what makes it more powerful? And you immediately answered. And please tell us if you can give us any more you want to elaborate, and any specific that you told us briefly about that last time. So let me turn this to be sure, with your permission, because you said that so well. Tell us about it, please.
Yeah, basically, because I was worked in China before. Before I come, my name is Jing Yi, and I'm a first year Harris MPP. And before I went to Harris, I got a law, Bachelor of Law in Fudan University. And
in which university?
Fudan University in Shanghai.
Okay.
Oh yeah, and then I gained the Master of China Development, Great China Development Study in Hong Kong University. It's
Hong Kong.
Yeah, in Hong Kong University, and it's basically about the city planning. I think I'm a typical
Lots of degrees. Okay.
Yeah, and I think I'm a typical migrant. My hometown is from the northeastern of China. It's called Jilin province. It's the old industry base in China, which has a lot of pollution. And then I went to Beijing, the capital of China, and then to finish my high school. And then I go to Shanghai to finish my university, and go to Hong Kong to finish my master. So when I was undergraduate, I also very interested in field research. I have go to other provinces in China, and I also want to do a lot of volunteer works. The research, the interest for me about the beautiful China.
Stop just a second.
Yeah.
The Chinese government invited a professor at Renmin University, and he in turn went to me, and we did the book together.
Yeah.
And it's in English, later on it's published as The Third Sector. And so I mention it because this is what Tocqueville said, this is what makes America most different. These third sector civic organizations really, we don't have in Europe. And legally it was illegal in the whole 19th century. You could not create it in France, and hold something like a Lions Club meeting. So we then looked at this for China, and China and Japan and Korea had no tradition of this, but it took off enormously in the last 20 to 30 years, and they found, especially afterward, things like typhoons and damage and flooding of rivers in China, where many people were killed, drowned, and many people then volunteered to go from. I remember one student, right, he was a teaching assistant with me, and he was quitting after 2 weeks. At the beginning of the course, said, I have to go back to China, there are people dying, I must go and help them. So he had no training in how to help with drowning, but he felt so strongly that he went back to try to help. So tell us a little bit about that, because this hugely, where did this come? Anything which, if you volunteered yourself, what did you and the people around you of roughly your age, because it was young people who did this, and this was not in Mao's Little Red Book. This was not taught as part of Marxism. It was not part of traditional Chinese family respect of the elders. Where did it come from? And then how do we get to the arts?
Yeah, actually, I think the volunteer in China is the method for the governments, to be specifically. While one of the methods for the governments is the
you see the masters?
The method or the approach for to train and to control something. You know, in China there was the NGO is a little prohibited by China. So mostly most volunteers are trained and selected by the government, and they have measure system to train the volunteer. And actually, before in Shanghai, I was the leader of the training project. Yeah.
The what project?
I used to the president of the Shanghai Young's League. You know that the Young's League.
The youth.
Yeah, the youth.
So it's called Shanghai Youth League.
Yeah.
For the whole city.
Yeah. I'm one of the present. There are three
Presenters or presidents?
President.
Presidents.
Yeah, and I'm take responsibility for about the training and stuff.
So there's just 3 presidents for all of Shanghai.
Yes.
And that this is, how big is Shanghai? What's the population?
There were about 20. I would say the 200 billion. 20 billion.
Okay.
I think.
It's about 4 times bigger than New York or London or Paris. 4 times bigger. And you were one of 3 of the presidents of the Youth League.
Yeah,
That's
but
impressive. Okay.
but the youth is not so much.
How'd you get chosen as one of 3?
Yeah, because actually my university is like the best university in Shanghai, and I'm also the leader of the Environment Society Council, like the student union of our city of our university. So we have.
You said that the Soviet Union?
The student union.
Student union.
Yeah. So
Okay.
we have like election, and and I was elected. And I have worked for about 4 years in that position, which is basically about the training and select the volunteers, especially for the environmental protection program and other expo maybe. Yeah, the export some some big activities. Yeah.
Terrific. Okay, this is real leader. Okay, so that's it. And experience. This is perfect. These are wonderful experiences feeding into, because you join the political and decisional leadership with the interest in cities, with the aesthetics. But so tell us more about how they came together, which you saw and you told us last time. But any ways that you want to elaborate a little bit?
Yeah. With the Beautiful China initiative, or right.
Yeah. Well, you said there were 4 things that can make beautiful.
Yeah.
Have more impact on people, not just creation, but also the reception. Where and how, and where's this come from? You know what that is? Why am I working on this? I wasn't working on this 20 years ago. This is new for me as well. So and I mentioned, the communist and socialist parties of the past. So no, Greens and the environment, that's not in Marx. So we don't do that. So there's been a revolution in the world. So where and how did this happen that you have seen and participated in with the example?
Yeah. Before China only have 4.
That is the point I'm making.
Yeah.
It wasn't. I mean, you stressed that the leadership, really the Communist Party and the government, I would be so. I mean, tell us a little bit more about you say the leaders may have trained, but did you train every single person who volunteered? As I had a teaching assistant here in Chicago. He was a grad student of social sciences. I don't think he had any training from the leadership in China. He was concerned about something about the deaths and the flooding, and it was a social issue for him. And people were dying. And in the same thing was also true, not just in China with a strong communist party, but in Korea and Japan. The same thing happened in all 3 countries. They all had young people, and they hugely increased civic organizations, or especially environment. And they didn't. That is the past. Let me add, and you can elaborate. But the past data that we have information about, basically. But the term NGO is a Western term. It's not a Chinese term. Non-governmental organization, because those organizations they call social organizations in China, Korea, and Japan, they worked under the government, and that went back 50, 100 years, whatever. So they had many foreigners who would come with them. So, for instance, Doctors Without Borders, a famous French example. It would send doctors to Thailand or to China or other places, and they would try to help people. They do surgery. They do all kinds of doctors helping. So it was an international kind of thing, supervised by the medical administrations of Japan, China, and Korea. When we got to the environmental issues, that is back up. That these were, as you put it, heavily and traditionally supervised and controlled. Were part of the normal hospital system, the normal, the normal ways which these things were done. they didn't deal with issues about changing the world. The environmental issues are potentially changing the world. I mean, you're saying, you've got smokestacks coming from those factories, change that. That's a small revolution. Okay, so that is, the Doctors Without Borders did not say that. Okay, so what changed? I mean, I'm sure. I mean, you may well have trained some people, but there were lots of people who came out of, I mentioned who left their graduate program. It was in the MAPS program. He went back to China. Just giving you one example. But we look at the data. There were hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of young people who joined these organizations in those years, and they did have an official. I won't try to go. You can. I think it's on a reading list. But just go ahead from the. I'm framing this to say why this is important, and you're in the middle of it. And if you were the head of environmental issues, you're president of the youth, and you've seen this with your own eyes. So this is wonderful if you can add some specifics. So I'm not disagreeing with you at all, but I'm simply adding a little more about the history and saying that the shared similar escalation of membership was also in Japan and Korea. And so it's not just the Communist Party at all. That's not enough. So it's also, I'm suggesting there's something about mass media coverage, about social media, about other people talking to each other. I mean, there are youth that is, in part, it was a youth issue, not just to do with your parent. Your parents didn't go and help people who were dying in the rivers. They died in the rivers, but the environment did get worse. That is, there was more flooding. There are other papers on this. So you live from the northeast. In the north of China, far from the coast, there were lots of people there who were not following regulations. There were people cutting down the trees, which were bad for the environment, and it did not have the past tradition of water going in a certain quantity when the snows melted or when it got warmer. And so more water went into the north inland, and when it got down into the middle and down closer to the ocean, the rivers became bigger and they had floods, which became worse. So that was due to, okay, so I won't try to go down. I won't try to summarize too much except to say that's part of why your parents may not have been so sensitive, because there weren't so many killed in that way. Nevertheless, it was then clearly was happening, but I'm asking, I'd love to hear any examples that might show, for example, where and why there might be a top-down rather than a bottom-up cause for these young people volunteering on environmental issues, because you were in the middle of that.
Yeah, it's a really good question, because we have worked on how to, from the bottom to the up level for years. Yeah, and basically I think there were several systems. The first one is we use the digital system. We have the
what system?
Like the digital system or the international. It's like apps in the phone. We call the volunteers collection. The name is translated is like the volunteer collection, and all the volunteers will register in that in that apps, and these apps can be used to record your time for volunteer, and it can also be provide some like trainings, or it can like to help you to fund your organizations and to help you to attend like register the activities. Basically, I think the apps. Why people are willing to go to the apps, because it will give some incentives. It will the credit system of China is like
the what system?
Like the credit system.
Credit.
Yeah.
Credit for meaning like the credit system for getting a loan.
Yeah, to getting a loan and
so
to
your
go.
Credit is called credit rating in English.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, right. To get the loan or get some jobs, yeah,
Okay.
and the HR will see your credit. So
Okay.
these apps will relate it to your credit rating system.
Okay.
So the youngs will go that. And
What proportion of students join this apps? That is 50%, 90%?
oh yeah,
Roughly.
that's a very good question. Yeah, I think it's the power of government. Because I were once in the youth league, and in the youth league it has like a class of in every university we have youth league. So we will tell the university's youth league to ask their college students to register in these apps. Yeah, and it's also have a tax for to the university. Yeah, and also I think maybe there are many people register in these apps, but the activities, there are not much people who are active to use that apps. So then we
Wait,
yeah.
one simple question?
Yeah.
Percent.
I think I remember the percent is about the 80%.
80%.
Yeah.
So roughly 80% of students are, okay.
Yeah, but it's just about register. Yeah,
Okay.
but
Okay.
it's not really
Okay.
active, because in China, every volunteer works will be supervised. Will be censored, especially which is published in that volunteer apps. So there were not quite too many people to register that, and the volunteer works which published in that apps is about like the garbage sorting or cleaning something, or like training the pupils. Yeah. So and also if you want to go some big activities like the flood, you need to get some additional trainings, and it's also what we do. We will select the people, and it's the part we will cooperate with the the social NGOs, which is under the government. Yeah, we will do the training materials and give them, and sometimes to let the people know how to do something. Professionally. Yeah, and also you have mentioned the very interesting question about like the flood or the river pollution. There was a new system in Shanghai, which is come from the bottom to the up, and it's the only I believe it's the policy right? The policy pilot in China. It's called the youth river management system. Before in China, it has the chief of a river. It is the mayor or the manager of the province. It is the responsible for the pollution of the river. But we have invented the system to let the youth to supervise the pollution. Because before the river pollution is only cooperate between the cities, and the cities they have different level. My city is about Huangpu River. One part of the river is governed by governed by a county, and one of the river is governed by the city. So the city's level is higher than the county's level, but they are both the chief of the rivers, so they are a little hard to communicate. But if we introduce the young volunteers, and they can cooperate together to deal with river.
What would they do? They would measure the dirt, or they would try to change the actual sources of say sewage going into the river?
Oh, yeah, it's basically about two things. First is the like the report to detect some pollution, and second is about something that the government cannot do. If the pollution is reported by government and government can do, they will not deal with it's the issues for the governments. But there are something government cannot do, like there are a little complex that some villages they will like to do something secretly, or they are like the government can only put the regulations, but they cannot educate the person, or cannot to prevent something secretly happen. So it's the volunteers will do to protect it.
Okay. So, and the point let's just add, let's finish that one. The point you made last time was 4 points that came together.
Yeah.
Remember those?
Yeah,
And
the economy, society, culture.
well,
Yeah.
but then how they came together in the arts, and where it had an impact. So where and why did we have this rise of sensitivity to the arts and culture, which you described yourself, but where and how, and we see this rise in civic organ. That is, bowling alone is the opposite of what happened in China. Bowling alone is people were not bowling in bowling leagues. Everybody said, oh, sure. So in China, you had the opposite. You had in roughly those same years as an escalation of young people joining organizations. And the most visible one, or one of them, was rivers and cleaning and helping drowning victims. But you're pointing out the environment and green issues were overlapping because they were drowning more because of the rivers were bigger and they were more polluted as well. Okay, so they were overlapping issues. Good points. Why did this then have an impact that was emotionally powerful with other parts, and how could the arts have played a role in ways that made this engage more young people? And you had 4 points.
Yeah, I remember that it's about the economic, politics, society, and culture. Yeah, and these 4 points before it's like the government, the old ideas of government, which is before the Chairman Xi coming to power, and one after
Before the what?
the Chairman Xi Jinping. Yeah, the
current chairman.
Yeah, the president of China came into power. They were only 4, and then he added that the like Beautiful China initiative. And as far as I'm
Okay, see that very important point. And that's the same point we heard earlier. Namely, there were separate issue areas, and they were put together under the label of Beautiful China in the world. Okay.
Yes.
And this is an answer also to Donald Trump. Okay. So, go ahead.
Basically, I think actually it's like economic transformation for the China's development. Because before China is like high pollution and then we control. And now because Chairman Xi, he works in Zhejiang province, it is it's near Shanghai, it's just nearby Shanghai, and it's the economy is very developed, and the people there he found that sometimes the green power can be also used to make the economy better. So he think the green power is also like the mountain of gold, all of this. So he think China cannot use the old system to develop because it will generate high pollution. So if the China want to develop and to compete with US. he think we should to transfer the development system and to take to take advance.
Take the lead, yes. And they did, and everybody agreed.
Yeah, to take the lead and do something ahead of like US or Europe. And it is, we want to use the green power to like develop the economy or cut on some costs to develop the technology. Yeah, so I think the first thing is that the principle for the beautiful China is for the economy, and the second is I think it's a combination of consumption and production. Before the China is like the production cities for most of the cities, but like the chairman Xi said, the main conflict is not the poor. Yeah, it's not the poverty. Is that the people have it's the demand of people with the like the lack of supply. So he want to. I think it can be used. I mean, it's very related to the art or the consumption society. He has select some cities for the whole country, and like Shanghai, and he want to choose these cities as the consumption cities. Yeah, and I think it's like he also think the consumption city is not we only like to generate some big buildings, some art museums, but the most important thing is the people, they should be participate. And one of his endeavor is called the garbage sorting, because he thinks the garbage sorting is the thing that all the people.
Salting or sorting?
Sorting, yeah.
Sorting.
Yeah,
okay, yes.
yeah, the garbage sorting.
Right.
Yeah, so he thinks the garbage sorting is one of the most important. It's a thing that people can like participate together. Yeah, yeah. So and he also built a lot of like museums, the arts, and which is most importantly into some like industrial base. Yeah, like my hometown. Yeah, to create a space for people to like start their own business and to talk with like to talk about the ideas of them. But I think one of the problem is that the city planning things sometimes is not fitted for all the for all the cities. The one of the most big problem in China is that if you have a policy pilot, your policy pilot will be like spread for all the cities, but every city has different conditions. Like Shanghai's and experience cannot be like used for Beijing. So it's the problems of something. Yeah, I mean, I have go to Beijing as has some experience copy from Shanghai, but people they just do not like to go to like these museums or these big halls, because they don't have the culture, and the halls is like just built nearby some very far away. It is very far from the downtown. It's like the ghost city. Yeah. So yeah, I think so for that.
I just want to add something to her.
Sure.
Because I was living in Beijing for about 20 years, and the first thing I want to mention is that I think like the art related to how to protect environment in Beijing is like, I want to also mention the river policy about maybe a response or something river. And one thing is that a river is near where I live, near a community where I live. I think after they protect this river to make it, to reduce the water pollution, several things, it became a park. It just became I would say it became a place that the nearby people's living there when they want to relax and when they have spare time, they can with their families to go to that river to running, or enjoy themselves or even fishing there. And I think that could be one approach or one method to relate it, the protect behavior with people's life. They could say okay, if we protect environment, we can have another place just nearby our city, nearby our community. It's not such big, museums or, you need to build any buildings. It's just a park you can enjoy with your families there. And I
Okay.
think, yeah.
Okay, let me add two things, but let's go around. Yeah, tell us your name, please.
My name's Ryan. I'm a third year undergraduate. I'm studying econ and data science.
Okay, fantastic. Any special interests that took you to chose those to focus on?
I guess one thing, I read this book, maybe you've heard of, called The Hidden Dimension. It talks about proxemics and sort of the ways that spaces are designed and how that influences the ways that people interact. And I assume that there's some sort of application at the urban design level where you can examine the ways that cities are designed to sort of influence the ways that people interact in certain ways in different parts of the city. So like Millennium Park in Chicago is an example of a way that people are sort of incentivized to interact in a certain way based on the fixed structures around that area, and then like the financial district obviously is very different from that, maybe influencing people for productivity or something like that.
What's the name of Michigan Avenue right next to Millennium Park? It has a new name. We're talking Little Revolution, such as what they did in Seoul. What was the Little Revolution similar to that in Chicago when you mentioned Millennium Park and people have a sensitivity to proximity there? Because most of you are not. Are you from Chicago?
No.
No. Are any of you from Chicago? No. See, most USC students are not from Chicago, so that's fine. So maybe none of you ever saw this or heard about it. You have a clue of this answer?
No.
Okay. The northern part of Michigan Avenue, north of the Chicago River, is the $1 Million Mile, and it has very high-end, expensive Italian designer shops and so forth. And these were attacked, robbed, broken. The windows were slashed, but broken, and people went into these and stole a lot of the stuff 3 or 4 years ago when Laurie Lightfoot was mayor. And the police then started to intervene, and they arrested a lot of people, and at least the mayor would say, the district attorney said, let them all go. Basically, most of them go for free, to not be punished at all. And that's the source of our losing of our respect for the law. So that's a battle between the leaders, both were women, African American, fighting among each other over these issues. So this is, in the last 10 years, this has become hot as we have leading the big cities of the U.S. have had similar. That is, the mayors of New York, and LA went through similar to something sort of like this has been nationally covered, related to, of course, the police activities were scandals, had national coverage, and these then became more and more politicized. Okay. Joseph Yee did a PhD here, and was a teaching assistant. We worked stuff on together. He did a PhD called God and Karate on the South Side. He was volunteering he's Korean American. He lived in Korea until he was 14. He lived in Orange County, then went to Berkeley for college, then he came here for his PhD in political science and political theory. He then started to go into some martial arts groups meetings and other things, but he was in Berkeley at the time when there was a referendum about should the state of California use affirmative action for admission to the University of California, Berkeley, UCLA, and so forth. And the citizens voted to do what? They said terminate affirmative action. And the proportion of students at Berkeley and UCLA and other places changed in 1 year from being African American to Asian. How much and in what direction? Anybody have a clue about this? Anybody from California? Okay. Number of African Americans dropped by about half, and the number of Asians doubled roughly. That is, the Asian students really had higher scores. They had simple test scores, and so I won't say automatically. Those test scores led them to be admitted, and the African American students were not admitted the way they had been in earlier years. Okay, Joseph Yee was in college at that time, and he was Asian, and he felt this was, that is, he felt very guilty, very unhappy about the situation. And what can we do? What can these young black men do differently what do they want to do themselves? Many of them don't know their fathers. They often fight with their mothers. They fight in school. Many of them drop out of schools, high school, so forth. Many of them end up in gangs. But are there other things which they choose voluntarily? Because they're pointing out, as well as Orlando Patterson, Harvard sociologist here, pointed out, the lower status black boys, men, would fight with their mothers, but the daughters would get along well with their mothers. So it's a gender young black men issue. And what do they want? What might they do? So he chose 4 things that he found that they chose that they wanted to do. Number 1 was martial arts. Number 2 was called Amway. It's a direct sales organization. People, I won't elaborate. Soko Gakkai was a Japanese Buddhist organization, and the and the basically evangelical churches, like such as makes America and Korea distinctive. And who then are the leaders of martial arts inside the U.S.? Asians. They're Chinese. It's an old, ancient Chinese, Korean, and Japanese set of activities. And nationally in the U.S., the martial arts people who are active are about 60% white and 40% non-whites, mostly African Americans. So these 4 organizations were not black organizations, all black. They generally had often Asian creation kinds of activities. In Soko Gakkai was a Japanese-funded Buddhist organization within the U.S. I mean, I live in Bronzeville, so I have a number of friends, a number of people I know are African American. They go to Soko Gakkai, which is right near where we live in Bronzeville, and they chant in Japanese. Nobody knows Japanese. But people they learn how to chant because they're part of the prayers. It's like using Latin in the Roman Catholic Church. In the Roman Catholic Church. Okay, Soko Gakkai is I'm pointing out the Asian-specific institutional development inside the U.S. that has an appeal to young black African Americans. And why do I say it has an appeal, and what's different that in part of make these different from the Boy Scouts or from let me just contrast with what the big alternative institution that you may have not seen visibly, but the is what makes the laboratory school here really different from the rest of public schools, especially in 1890. The term is called progressive education. Are you comfortable with that term, or is it just unknown? What's progressive education? And how does it relate to what we heard about the youth in China? Progressive education basically says it's bottom up. We do what the kids want, not tell them, you memorize, the French language, you learn, the multiplication table, you memorize American history. You don't say that, you say, what are you interested in doing today? Let's talk about it. So that progressive style of listening is in a sense, you can say, egalitarianism. And egalitarianism is what we also have with the Bible, with Marx, with Mao, and with the lab school. It's not simply communism, it's egalitarianism. So these are two very different things. That is, they overlap, but they're not the same thing at all. And so I'm pointing to where do the young Chinese volunteer, and I'd say part of it is related to this. It's related to the debate over organizational membership, Putnam, Bowling Alone, and where and why do these organizations and which kinds of organizations rise. That's what's in this chapter. The chapter on a reading list for the day is really on home, but in the rest of the book, it's where and I'm using this one anecdote which is the title of Joseph Yee's book. Is so powerful because it addresses several of these issues. The second example we follow up a little bit is in the same chapter. I'll just mention this and then I'll ask if anybody looked at that, how we contrast Toronto, talk of proximity. How and why has membership transfer? Well, the proximity. I won't say too much there. Let's stick with the civic organization as an actor and how it may relate to the arts. How does that work? Let me give an example. The northern part of Michigan Avenue is the $1 million mile. The southern mile of Michigan Avenue is called the Cultural Mile. It's now in steel or bronze or cement and so forth. And they now have flowers in the middle of the street, which there didn't used to be. But most of all, this is where the Chicago Symphony, Chicago Art Institute is, Millennium Park. But most of all, where are the people who would go to these things? 20, 30 years ago, I was on a talk show called Is Chicago Dying? Serious. That was the title of the talk show. And for 2 hours, there was a guy at UIC who published a report which said something like Chicago is dying because the downtown, meaning Michigan Avenue, sorry, not just Michigan, meaning more State Street. State Street was where Marshall Field, lots of shops were there, no longer were being patronized with the numbers, and many, many fewer people were living in those areas. Second, we had a decline in manufacturing. That is, there were lots of little manufacturing shops just south of that and then west of that. That is, there were clothing stores, clothing factories, all kinds of little bits of manufacturing, and they went bankrupt. Lots of these things. So they were in many offices, not offices, manufacturing buildings, but they were small. And they were especially around the south side and the west side of that. And the city government took them over because they didn't pay their taxes, and so the property owners gave them to the bank. The bank turned them over to the city because they didn't pay taxes. So the city government had the issue of what to do with all these buildings are basically empty. And what did they do? They negotiated at a low price, a low enough price that they could give them for a low fee to Loyola, DePaul, Columbia, these four main universities, and then a whole bunch of others. And they don't have their names on most of them. A few of them do say in some of the smaller buildings for Columbia and Loyola. But this, just west of Michigan Avenue, there are thousands. This is much bigger than this USC campus is highly visible. You know, we have architecture and all this stuff saying the USC is famous. None of this stuff is famous. You can't tell you're on a Chicago campus at all if you walk around there. But you go to some meetings that I've now been to, they talk about this group. There's a group called the Chicago Downtown Association. I've been to some of the meetings. Hey, and they say, so we had a speaker who was the director of these activities where they built a new building for a dormitory, a big, beautiful dormitory, owned by the four colleges, and they put on a whole bunch of activities, speeches, arts and concerts and so forth. And they built it so you could have practicing rooms for music, so you could sing, you could dance, you could play loud music, and they've got soundproofing enough within the building that you could live, live in a student dormitory, practice right there, and go to class, half a block away, and you could go over to the Art Institute, the Symphony, and Millennium Park. Okay, so that was a new, and that is Daley as well. Daley too, Mayor Daley too. This is a top-down policy from the mayor. What happened in Toronto that was different? Anybody look at that chapter? Okay. I came from that. So I developed this from I've been doing an oral history of Chicago. So I'm following this from Harold Washington up to present. Dan Silver, my collaborator on the book, was here as a grad student. He taught here for a little bit, and he's now at the University of Toronto. So he studied Toronto. The city of Toronto is more like, let me link this back. Is Daley making this decision? Does this fit with Tocqueville? No. Tocqueville's analysis is that the legitimacy of the American political system is based on people having little civic organizations together. You have a farmer and a herder. So you have one person has cows and bulls, the other has corn, and to keep the cows from eating the corn, they got together and they build a fence. Okay, so this is not having the mayor or the national government say you need a fence. These two local folks together said, let's build a fence. That's Tocqueville's thesis that this is how American society works. That you leave people at the very low level to build things together, and they construct legitimacy of the whole political system. Daley and the Chicago is a total exception. In 19th century France, you couldn't have a civic organization, whereas Tocqueville wrote about there were two big issues. What were the biggest issues in 19th century America that he talked about? And they were also women's issues. Women didn't have the right to vote. in the 19th century in America. But the women could and did have big meetings in Boston, New York, and they had two big issues. What were their biggest concerns? Slavery and alcohol. They wanted to abolish slavery and abolish alcohol. And when Louisa May Alcott wrote this book, Uncle Tom's Cabin, when Abraham Lincoln met the author, I think when Lincoln met the author, he said, "So you're the little lady who started the big war." The arts, the novel, publicized and built support, not Abraham Lincoln. When Abraham Lincoln first debated with Douglas, who was Stephen Douglas? Stephen Douglas was an entrepreneur. He owned some property in the south side of Chicago, and to make it be visible, he created the University of Chicago. It was the south side, and it went bankrupt in about 10 years. Then later on, it was recreated in Hyde Park, and it's now. But Stephen Douglas also, he was a major player in politics. He created what they called the land-grant universities, and he also created funding for the railroads. So the national railroads, clearly, the railroads were created in part by giving government land to the railroad companies cheaper, and so that the land would be subsidizing the people to build the railroads, and then the states could have land, so-called land-grant university. They get the land to have the university there, and the state capitals are in small towns in America in general. In terms of proximity, France and China are the opposite from the U.S. The U.S. has places like Austin, Texas, Madison, Wisconsin, small towns, and Urbana, Springfield. These are Hartford, Connecticut. The capitals of most of these cities are small towns. And why? This is the view of Thomas Jefferson articulated, that cities are corrupt. Cities are corrupting. We'll have prostitution, we'll have drugs, we'll have crime. We want to keep the youth of America safe in small towns. So we want to build these new land-grant universities far away from the cities. And they are. So when Stephen Douglas, nevertheless, and so Stephen Douglas made these, he initiated these, he made a major impact on, if you can also call it, the modernization or the capitalist development of America. By the end of the 19th century, the people who made the most money were railroad owners, then later Ford. So Rockefeller, Ford, Mellon, these people in these issues became very, very rich. They started to build a couple of things more like the Europeans, castles. They looked, by American terms, we don't have any castles in America. We're all just farmers. So the Thomas Jefferson view, we're all simple farmers together. These people, they build a castle, bang, we're going to change things. So they invented taxes and income tax, and have other things that would. And so the Theodore Roosevelt, father of Franklin, Theodore Roosevelt ran for president. He was elected, and what did he do that was like China that you're talking about? Anybody know? And Xi right now. How do you beautify? What did he do that was analogous around 1890, 1900, 1905? Yes.
How you created the national park system?
Yes. Tell the others about that.
I don't know much about the actual history of it. I just know that during that time, I know he was on a trip, I think to Yellowstone specifically, and I think that was the inspiration for the national park system. Was after seeing that part of the country, it's like this area needs to be protected generally from expansion by like people into the area to keep like sections of nature natural.
Exactly. So the state of Nevada, for example, has more land belongs to the national parks than to any individuals. So the national parks are big landowners, especially in big western parts of the U.S. And so the Chinese did not have this generally in the past, but something which is, so Theodore Roosevelt's simile was also against the visible sort of very affluent capitalist building of big castles and so forth. So there was a move in an egalitarian direction and the building of nature and celebrating the national parks, which everybody can go to for free. You don't have to pay to get into the park or to own only land which is private. So the sense of using parks and having the government pay was a model. But flash forward to China. How do the Chinese and President Xi do something now about what they call cultural parks? What are and one of the most famous is called the Yangtze River Cultural Park Project. And does it include Shanghai, your big city? Can you tell us anything about that park?
Actually, I was involved in that project before.
No,
but I was.
Please do.
Actually, because I only do some work about, because I was about the regulation part. It's a very big project, which is I remember it's called the Yangtze River, Green Union. Yeah, it is to make the Yangtze River zone to be like a green zone. Yeah, and the culture parks project is one of that part, and also the thing I said, the Yangtze River Chief is also one of that, to make the river, to make the part more beautiful. Yeah. And I remember that there were two, this project is taken lead by the Department of National Resources and Environmental Protect by the central government. Also, it was built based on the originally originally nature reserve of the Yangtze zone. Because there are many lakes in the Yangtze River zone, like Tai Lake. The Tai Lake is the biggest lake in China, which is have salt water. So it has generated a lot of pollution, and also it has the floods. So the government has generated the old lake into a park to to build the we call the special towns near that part, which also can be combined by the tourists. Yeah. So I think the principle of the China's national park is built on the old natural reserve and the old the culture reserve Huang Mountain. Yeah. So is and which can be also combined with the nearby zones. Yeah.
Why is this so different from the past and from the American version of national parks?
Sorry, you mean the differences between that?
Yeah. That is, this is that this President Xi, I mean, probably Americans have never heard about this. I've never seen anything from the American press really, but why is this very big, very different, and dramatically different, and more ambitious than the American version? And that is, so that the label of beautiful China in the world is made more powerfully with this example. It's not just selling electronic equipment. It's beautifying China in a culturally defined, explicitly labeled way. So, okay, so there, I'm starting to give you an answer. There are 2 or 3 answers. Okay. Yeah, I think you can see when we compare. I mean, these are quite simple points. First big simple point is it wasn't just the countryside and the mountains. The Chinese Cultural Park includes the biggest cities. So Shanghai is part of the whole cultural park area. So the big cities were included. 1, 2, they're much bigger geographically. It's not just the Rocky Mountain. That is, if you had all the Rocky Mountains as one park, that would be more similar. That is not just having one little bit of it is a lot of state. You take the whole, I mean, roughly half of Nevada is a national park, but it's not one national park. There's separate little parks. This thing is called the Yangtze. It's a huge, and there's several of these. I mean, I don't know how many there are now in China, but there are 3 or 4 of these that are very, very big. So cities included, much bigger, including states. And third, they have this label, cultural park, and cultural park includes. They also include things which are featured in some way, the history and culture and distinctiveness of China. So these could be battlefields of the Mao fighting a battle, among others, in 1945. It could be things that could go back 1,000 years. It could be Genghis Khan. It could be all that is China. What we have, the U.S. is so small, and most of all our history is tiny. We don't have any history in the U.S. It's simple and short. China has a long, complicated, diverse history in ways that are featured by things like the cultural park that play up the art and culture and history and meaning of these, but also these, of course, can play into the legitimating the political system as well. So, but we've now had evaluations that are being done that I'm working with the people in China. They're looking at these parks and they ask questionnaires. What are the things that you really like? Or what do you think about these cultural parks? Are they really good? Absolutely fantastic. I love it. It's unbelievable. It's terrific. Question 1. Question 2, kind of thing. What do you do most? What do you enjoy most about going to the cultural park? Number 1 is the ethnic and traditional history of China. So they see buildings or festivals or dances enacted in costumes which carry on something from the history and the specific culture. So number 1 is the ethnicity. 2, the festivals, things like the dance. And number 3 is bars. Okay, so they have fun going to the bars as well, which are included in the cultural parks. Do you have bars in American parks? No. See, imagine we could have bars, okay. So in China, it's not that they build new bars. They simply include the bars that are in Shanghai or the big cities that are there. So in that sense, featuring and putting these together, I'll add one more point, which is before these cultural parks, they use the term park, or I think it's park. Yeah, the term park can also refer in Chinese. I don't know the exact Chinese words, but why and how. But one building could be called a cultural park, even that one building in a city. And so that city, it could be like like a loft, an artist's loft, or the way that Daley used those manufacturing houses, former houses and shops and buildings in downtown Chicago and converted them into a university. These kinds of things that could be called, and could have been called in China, a cultural park instead of a cult, but in Chicago it's only called a cultural mile. But if the whole thing, I mean, if all of Chicago could become part of a cultural park, that would be more what we said is, imagine we called, Northwest Illinois with Rockford and Naperville and downtown Chicago are all part of a cultural park, and whereas downstate might not be. Okay, it would be more like that, of all of that, and that includes a lot of entertainment and bars and nightclubs and so forth. So all those are included in the cultural park, and so in that the list, that those three names of things which I'm mentioning can all be together. Okay, let's take a 10-minute break. We go for one more hour, or not quite an hour. Let's take roughly a 10-minute break, and then we'll recommence. Recommence.